Do you believe that consciousness is a function of the brain or a function of physical matter? Or do you believe that consciousness is fundamental and physical matter is a function of consciousness? And that's really, whatever you believe, I would say question your beliefs, because because be a skeptic, and I encourage healthy skepticism.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who's out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is spiritual teacher Tony Christie. We're going to be talking about his new book, Death, You've Gotta Love It, as well as his previous book called Labyrinth, Your Path to Self-Discovery. Tony has been working in personal and spiritual development for over 20 years, helping people clear energetic blocks, empowering them to step into their own mastery. We discuss all aspects of fear, childhood experiences, belief systems, and some of the techniques he uses for helping people to open up blocked energy. Among those is his use of a dowsing rod, which is sometimes also called a divining rod, which assists him with clients to zero in on their deepest challenges. Our talk ranges from the spiritual, mystical, to very practical tools and accessing intuition and authenticity. So let's jump in. This is Tony Christie. Tony, it's great to meet you, and I'm looking forward to talking about all things spiritual, metaphysical, physical, all the wonderful things that you've been doing for so many years, and welcome to the Exploding Human podcast.
Thank you, Bob. I'm delighted to be here, and hello to everybody listening.
Yes, and we're in Ireland today with Tony. So in case you didn't know what his accent is, that's what it is. Mine is a combination of Midwest and a West Coast accent mixed together, because those are the two places I've lived the most. In case anyone cares about that, I don't. Why don't you tell people what you do and who you are and the word labyrinth? And how that applies to Tony.
Yeah, I'll have to give a very short description. For over 30 years, I worked as a manager in the Irish public service, and decided my heart was calling me elsewhere to move into working more with people directly. So about 20 years ago, I wouldn't say I found the labyrinth found me. The labyrinth that many people, if they're familiar with it, will know it as a walking meditation with one path from the outside to the center, symbolic of going to your own center, or a symbol of your journey in life or whatever. And at the time I needed a lot of, I needed to find answers to a lot of things. So oftentimes I would walk the labyrinth, looking for peace or looking for guidance on some issue in my life. And I found that insights were coming to me when I did that. So I started looking for ways to share this wisdom, if that's the word, with people, but it's for them to access their own wisdom. And so I started doing workshops on the labyrinth, and then I created a deck of what I call Labyrinth Wisdom Cards, which are different aspects, each card with a different meaning, but each reflecting some aspect of you or your journey in life. And so that's, again, set me on a journey of sharing not only what I had learned, but helping people access their own inner wisdom. I ended up writing a book on the labyrinth. I've traveled the world. And then when I left that public service, that senior management job about 10 years ago, I was meditating a week or two later, and how to use the labyrinth in one-to-one healing sessions with people came to me. So getting the people to trace a finger labyrinth, the path of the labyrinth with their finger. And I would hold a dowsing rod, or I call it a divining rod in Ireland, but it's generally called a dowsing rod. And the rod would move to indicate where the person was to stop. And there's a meaning of every point in the labyrinth, and that point was particularly relevant for that person, the person at the time. And it would either mean that some of the, if it was an energy block or some emotional block, that was being healed and cured, that was being let go. And then in other points where they'd stop, different energies would come in to boost, their chakra system or boost their whole energy field. So the end result was in which I call Melchizedek Labyrinth Healing, is that the person felt, the least they felt was more centered and balanced, but usually much lighter in themselves because they had let go maybe of something that they were holding on to and they were ready to let go of. So all my work really has been with the Labyrinth, has been really sharing it with people and inviting them to try it and to see if they like it. And if not, well, let's thank you for trying. But many, many people have got loads of benefit from the Labyrinth. And then as I was doing a lot of, I suppose, work on myself as well, healing work. I had many different fears at the time and that I had to face myself and go through. And I eventually found that with all the different therapies and healers that I had gone to visit, that I was starting to get clearer in myself. And I realized or discovered that I'm very sensitive. One person described me as super sensitive, in that when I'm working with person in one-to-one, even online, doesn't matter where they are, it can be in the US or people working in Europe, and I can feel what emotions they're feeling at the time. And sometimes even where they're feeling it physically in the body, the lump in the throat or the weak knees or the punch in the stomach, that, the expressions that we use to kind of put terms on physical terms on our emotions. So in being able to identify with the person what they're feeling, it enables them and allows them and empowers them to go into that and to release or to let go or to heal whatever issue is happening for them. So a lot of my work now is one-to-one sessions with people. I still write a lot. I share a wisdom card on my social media, Instagram, Facebook every day, and really just doing what I can to help people in whatever way I can help them.
The thing that you were just talking about, fear, seems to be the root of most challenges and difficulties in life. And at least that's my own experience and what I've seen in other people. And sometimes I'll ask myself, when I'm really thinking about it, what am I actually afraid of? And then the next question is, well, what if that happens? Then what am I afraid of? What if that next thing happens? Then what am I afraid of? and it all comes down when you, at least for me, when I take it all the way, that I will be destroyed. I will die, essentially, and not even physically maybe feeling that way. So there's this undercurrent of a visceral response to things that I may be afraid of, that really, when I take it all the way to the bottom, it's destruction. And it's a really interesting thing, because when you take it all that way, it's like, okay, let's say you're somebody that's afraid to, you're in a social situation and you just get afraid to talk to people. A very common thing. I'm shy. I'm nervous. I'm whatever. But I'm afraid to start a conversation. Well, is that actually going to cause you to die? But it feels that way. It's just something I've thought about quite a bit, because I see fear as the obstacle in almost everything.
And I deal a lot with fears. I've dealt with a lot of my own fears, and I deal regularly or almost daily with fears that other people have. But oftentimes what we might think is one fear can be a combined fear. We often hear people, you briefly referred to it, fear of speaking in public or speaking in a group. But that's generally not what the fear is. The fear is maybe of being judged, or the fear of feeling foolish if I say something foolish, or the fear of not even being able to speak or get the words out or be coherent. And so the fears, and the fear isn't normally, it is in that moment, but the root of the fear goes back to some earlier incident in life where the fear initially, or where the mind initially decided to, okay, it's better stay quiet here, or because I'm afraid something will happen, or I'll make a fool of myself, or I'm afraid people will think less of me. If we can go back, and I often find that we can go back to, usually it's something in earlier childhood, but it can be something in another life or a previous life that people bring through. Particularly, I have found people who have, the difficulty speaking. They may have had, an issue in a previous life where they were killed because of they were outspoken, or they were a leader in their tribe or in their community, and they were defeated in battle, and so their throat was cut, or they were hung, or there was some traumatic experience that comes through into this life. So when the issue of speaking out or sharing whatever they have to share comes up, it's almost like they go into freeze mode because of the previous experience. And so that could happen, if people, if they were in school when they were younger in this life, if they were said something, or the rest of the children laughed at them, or the teacher said that's a silly, or made this comment that it wasn't a very nice thing to do or say, well, then that the emotion of that time can come into the present life. And so oftentimes it's not what the situation that I'm in, or that anyone else is in at the present moment. It's actually the mind reverting back to how it chose to respond at that time. But half the battle is, first of all, knowing that you are in fear, or that there is a fear there. And as I said, you're halfway to solving it once you realize, oh, I do have a fear about this. Certainly, I was reluctant to speak out or speak my mind at times, particularly in work situations where maybe I knew, say, my boss would have a particular view on a certain issue. And if I had a different view, initially I was keeping quiet, but I had to eventually come to be true to myself. And that was really one of my journeys of, self-growth or personal development, that in being true to myself, I had to speak what I felt was true for me, and then allow the other person to respond in whatever the way they responded. Yeah. But I can tell you, it wasn't easy. I'd have to take a deep breath, and I could feel the knot in my stomach, as I would say, okay. But it got to the stage where if something was coming up, I'd feel that knot in my stomach, or I'm a bit sick here if I'm going to have to say what I think. But I couldn't not say it. So I would... Yeah. I brought myself to the stage where anytime I got that funny feeling, I say, oh God, I'm just going to have to do what's right for me here and go for it. And, the interesting thing is, the more often I did that, the easier it got. And it got to the stage where I was no longer getting that knot in the stomach, and no longer becoming self-conscious. I was just saying what honestly, and even from a place of compassion, that I was saying it from my heart at times, that this is what I feel, or this is what I think. And allowing the other person to completely contradict me if they disagreed or disagree completely with me. And even if they were the decision maker, to go and decide something, whatever they wanted to do, rather than me. So some of the fears, really, what I have discovered is, with any fear, the first step is to take some action. Either learn about it, or do something about it, or pick the small fear first and see how you get on with that one, rather than the biggest fear, whatever that one might be.
Yeah, it's amazing how powerful that stuff is. It can carry your whole life, and sometimes you don't even realize. I had an incident, not a major incident, when I was, maybe in second or third grade, where I was enormously embarrassed in front of my entire class in this situation. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to allow this to happen again. The feeling of, I guess, feeling humiliated and embarrassed was so painful to me in this one thing that happened, that I actually made the decision, this is never going to happen to me again. And so I acted accordingly to make sure that that didn't happen again, which manifested in not taking certain risks, trying to gain control of situations, whether it was through using sarcasm maybe to put people down so it wouldn't happen to me. I did a bunch of things like that to avoid the pain of reliving that again. It took me a while to figure out that was something that that I didn't have the power over. It had the power over me, and I didn't like it. And so I had to make some changes, and take some risks. And it's real scary. I think one of the scariest things for people is to be vulnerable, because you feel like you're so open that if you open your heart and you open your thoughts to people, and that they are going to act in a way to hurt you. And what I found was that the opposite would happen. That when I did do that, I mean, you have to be judicious about where you do certain things and with whom, of course. You don't want to, if your instincts are saying this is a dangerous person, then you're not going to do that. But for the most part, most people really like to see vulnerability in other people if it's coming from like being honest. And so it's kind of an interesting thing with being a human being, that sometimes the opposite of our survival instincts are actually better for us than being guarded.
Sometimes, we may not even realize that we're in fear. But for me, fear is that kind of constricting, diminishing, shrinking type of feeling, that where you feel smaller about yourself in whatever the situation is. And the opposite, I came across, somebody gave me a book a few years ago about just fear and love, that there are only really two ways of being. There are lots of different emotions in fear. It can be frustration or anger or irritation or anxiety, but they're all fear-based in that and the sense of when you experience them, you feel less, almost as if your body is shrinking or your energy is shrinking in size. But the opposite of that is the space of love, where you feel expanded, you feel, I suppose, more alive, more full of life, more vibrant, So I came to the sort of conclusion and understanding that I'm either in a space where I'm feeling that diminishing, constricting energy, or I'm feeling that expanded, enlivening energy. And then I realized I have a choice, that I can choose whether or not to be in fear. And those little incidents that you gave and that I mentioned earlier about, facing the fear or speaking up in a situation where I hadn't previously before, even though there might have been a little bit of slight apprehension, but afterwards the feeling is of more, it's a more fulfilling feeling. It's a feeling of satisfaction that, when you're true to yourself, I think our true ways of being are that expanded, loving space and state. But there's so many events or experiences in life that switch us back into the fear. I'm of the view that I have chosen all the experiences that I've had in my life, and some of them, in hindsight, I might have preferred not to choose them.
Yeah.
But I chose them to see how I would respond, to see if I could. And now when things are happening, and I can't say I'm always in this happy, loving space, that different things happen, I still find myself getting a little bit annoyed or a little bit angry or frustrated with people. But then very quickly now I'm able to switch into standing back from the situation and say, okay, can I look at this situation differently? How can I look at it where it's actually a positive situation rather than something that appears negative? Can I be in a positive frame of mind dealing with this? And oftentimes that brings a different perspective into what was previously a fearful situation. Now, I'm not sure if is that going to work with a fear of spiders or snakes? Maybe yes and maybe no, but I think what does work and help a lot is giving yourself knowledge, learning about whatever fear it is that you have. So if it's something practical, whether it's fear of flying or what it might be, the more you learn about flying and how safe it is, or then go to somebody who can, or find out what it is, what's the seed of that fear within you, because it's more than likely related to something that experience you had previously, either in this life or even another existence.
Yeah, I was just thinking about another thing that when I was a kid, talking about things getting triggered later. There was a painter that was painting the house across the street, and he was up on a really tall ladder on the second story, and I was just watching him out the window, and the ladder slipped, and he went down the side of the house, like his hands and and he fell. He was okay. He got up but it freaked me out, and I could not go up a ladder. I couldn't do it for years. And I made a decision to, at some point, like, I can't live like that. I don't want to be afraid of going on a ladder. And I'm telling you, man, I had to do it so many times. First I go up 2 rungs, then I would do 3, and I'd come down, and I knew it was I knew it was irrational in some way. And I actually remembered, why I felt that way. But I went, I'm going to overcome this. And I did. I was able to do it. And I was really proud of myself for confronting that fear, because, I'd only, as many times as I've seen people on a ladder, I've only seen one person fall. The other people were fine.
Yeah.
But that one time thing, and that's a small sort of obvious kind of thing. There's not a lot of emotion tied to it or anything like that. It's just it's like a spider. Why am I afraid of a spider? Why am I afraid of going up a ladder? And yes, you can get hurt. It is possible.
See, with the ladder, going back to the knowledge thing, there's ways of making ladders safer. You put your weight or your stops at the bottom of them so that they don't fall. Or even when you're climbing, generally if you climb or coming up or down, if you have your hands higher than your head, it's generally a more secure way of climbing, So there, if you educate yourself about, there are right and wrong ways to climb a ladder or to set up a ladder in the first place, Actually, when you were talking there, I was thinking I used to do a lot of running, from when I was very young to running up to in my 40s and running marathons and stuff. And, it's when I'd stopped, or at some stage it came to me that I was running away from something, and when I realized I was running away from something, then I had to realize that I was running away from myself, and I was running for hours out on the road. I say, okay, so eventually, life catches. I think if you're afraid of something, life will generally give you the lessons to see if you'll find a way of overcoming them, whether it is your ladder or whether it was me sort of running for myself when I could no longer run for, with injured or bad knees or whatever. Then I had to sit with myself and sit with, the different emotions and fears and experiences that I really was running away from. And so part of my sort of life journey or journey of healing was being able to be with myself, and sometimes that's not the easiest place to be, depending on, what you've been avoiding, and as I said, I was avoiding everything at one stage. Now I'm much, much better at being with myself, I think I've become reasonably clear within myself just because of all the different healing therapies and different, people I've gone to see that have helped me, or, and there's help out there for if there's anybody who, if you have a fear, whatever that fear is, there's usually somebody out there who will be able to help in some way with it, So whether it is me you'd want to come and see to help identify what it is, or whether it is a hypnotherapist, or whether it is somebody else, that there are ways that you don't need to live in fear, that it's not the best, if you like, for me, it's not the best use of my time anymore, so I choose not to live in it. I choose to find a way of, and I switch. There's a key way of switching from fear to love is to find something you're grateful for. So whether it's something, have a gratitude practice, which I do every morning when I wake, before I get out of bed, I list 5 things I'm grateful for. And sometimes they can be very simple things. I'm grateful that I have a roof over my head, or I have a car outside the door that can get me places, or there's somebody in the bed beside me who loves me, or whatever that is, or sometimes even that I have hands, or I have eyes that can see the hands. But when you start, listing things that you're grateful for, you can't be in fear. They're just 2 different vibrations or 2 different frequencies. And so gratitude really is the gateway to love. When you start listing things that you're grateful for, you're actually more or less saying that you love these things, and you're bringing yourself into a space of a loving space. So for anyone who's listening, if you're wondering how do you shift, start expressing things you're grateful for. And then at night, the last thing I do before I close my eyes and see if I can get to sleep is I list one thing in the day that I'm most grateful for that happened during the day. And so my day starts and my day ends in gratitude and in love, rather than in fear of what might happen the next day, and it's a wonderful practice. I would recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, and it forces a perspective change if you're, because it's really easy, at least for me, to think about the things that aren't right and to believe that if they were right, I would feel better. If X, Y, and Z happens, then I can be happier, and then I can relax, and then I'll be safe. And of course, that never happens, where all these things line up. And if they do, then there's other things that go out of alignment. It's just not the way, it works to have everything exactly the way you want it all the time. And then you would probably get used to that, and it wouldn't have the meaning that it does.
More common to think of what's the worst possible thing that could happen, rather than, well, what's the best thing that could happen? What is the best possible outcome of this situation? I'm a firm believer in your thinking influences a lot more, not only how you feel about yourself or your way of being, but your thoughts, for me, can manifest and come to fruition. Now, they say in this earthly realm, the connection between having a thought and the thought actually being realized or manifesting can be quite distant, so that we don't put the two and two together. But the more you think positive thoughts, the more you see positive outcomes, or can visualize positive outcomes. I mean, it's very common among top sports people to use visualization techniques. That's a positive way of, and not only seeing themselves, say, winning a race or scoring a goal or whatever it is, but also the feeling of it, and that the feeling of it puts energy. You have the energy of what's it like to win, or to win money, or to get the job, or to have a wonderful relationship, or to whatever it is. The more you can get into the feeling of what that feels like, well, then actually the more likely it is to come to fruition. So it's almost fake it until you make it, if you've heard that expression.
I like that expression.
And there's a bit of truth in it as well.
So tell me about this dousing, how you do that, or divining. Well, is it a stick? Is it like a rod, or divining rod?
Yes, I have a rod. Now I know I have to try and explain to people. It's like an L-shaped rod that will rotate when it's held, or when it picks up an energy that moves.
So it's metal.
Yes.
And let me describe it there's a handle, and there's a rod, and it's spinning around.
Yes, and it spins around, and sometimes, if I would be, dousing for, I build labyrinths, or on a site as to where the center of the labyrinth is, I will have two, one in each hand, and ask a particular question, and ask the rods to cross, say, for the exact best point for the labyrinth on this land, or whatever it might be. So it's some people use a pendulum as well, where you just get yes and no answers. So again, it's a matter of tuning. For me, it's tuning in. You see, in Ireland, it's called divining, and which for me has the element of the divine in it, or you're tuning into a higher consciousness. That you can do it without rods, but the rods are a very visual indication of a yes and no answer, or the right or the best place for something to happen, or for something to be. So it's part of, I suppose, accessing, that we have our 5 physical senses, seeing and hearing and touch and taste. And the dowsing taps into, we have many other senses, or we have access to a lot more information other than what our 5 physical senses are giving us. People have their intuition, that I'm sure many people would have got the sense somebody is looking at them, either in a bar or on a bus or whatever it is, and they look around and there's someone staring straight at them. Or inadvertently, I found myself staring at somebody in a crowded place, and they turn and look back at me. So what is that there is some interaction beyond the physical, that we are all a part of, that the energy field that is everywhere. But a lot, we can learn a lot even from our own intuition, but we can learn a lot about ourselves, and we can get a lot of information through these non-physical abilities that we have. And so for me, they're as much a part of my life as, it's like, how can I explain that if I get a physical sensation, if oftentimes, say in my stomach, the stomach, the energy center or chakra related to the stomach is your solar plexus, which is in that area. But almost invariably, much of the time when I'm working with people, I will feel a tightening or a knot or a queasiness in that area of the body that I am picking up from them. Now, it can be thousands of miles away, but we're just sharing a screen, or we're connected through the internet. So how is that? How
Yeah.
does that happen? It's more than likely, that there. My understanding is there's a whole energy field that it doesn't matter how far away somebody is, we can be instantly, with somebody energetically, and it's a bit like, sometimes you think of somebody and you're thinking about phoning them and the phone rings and they're on the end of the phone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's like there are some life gets a lot more wonderful when you start exploring these kind of interesting and intriguing phenomena that exist and that we're all a part of, so I would write about some of them. I have a new book out called Death, You've Got to Love It, which is about choosing, to be in a space of fear or in a space of love with through the lens of one of our greatest fears is the fear of death. You were talking about annihilation earlier, and that can be one of our greatest fears, or one of the greatest fears in dying. But generally the fear of dying it's a bit like the fear of speaking in public. There's 3 or 4 or 5 different fears all mashed into one, and oftentimes we have to look at each one of them, so many people even have a fear. There's a saying in Ireland, don't tempt fate, or whatever, maybe it's worldwide, but don't talk about death because you might hasten its arrival, or something along those lines. I don't subscribe to that anymore, but our people's fear of dying can extend to being judged, if that's their belief that there is a judgment after death, or they may fear leaving their loved ones behind, or how their loved ones will cope if they're the main breadwinner, or there can be a fear of not having lived a full life, or having fulfilled a life purpose, if that's the belief. So there, again, the fears, whatever the fear is, it can often be broken down into its constituent parts, and then each of those parts can be hacked to get rid of it.
My father's fear of death was, he told me that he goes, I'm not afraid of being dead. He goes, but I think the process, I'm afraid it's going to hurt. Yeah. That's what he was afraid of. He wasn't in pain either. It was just sort of this idea that because a life is ending, it necessarily has to be physically, maybe even excruciatingly painful, which that's not was the case when he died. It was not a painful death at all. I obviously some people do have that. It was an interesting thing that he just thought that. Why he thought that, I don't know. And I tried to talk to him about it a little bit. And it wasn't the easiest discussion to have. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And with that's a very common fear, I think, and I would prefer not to have that experience myself of a painful, journey to that moment of death. But most conditions now, and there are some diseases which can be, or illnesses that can be very painful, but most conditions now can be treated with, pain medicine that people don't have to, they don't have to go through the pain of the whatever illness that they might have. And as you say, how many people actually experience that? Again, I bring it back to, if you have a fear of something like that, educate yourself about it, and whatever the fear is, and see. Need to be a little bit careful that the fear doesn't manifest either. Now look, your father, it didn't for your father, and a lot of the times the fears are thoughts in our head rather than something that there is no sort of tangible connection between what we think might happen and what we fear might happen, or what will happen and what we fear might happen. But the more you can sort of educate yourself about it, because most of the research that I have done in relation to death is that almost all says that we die peacefully. We die, that there is that moment, whatever where we are in the times and days and hours even leading up to death, that there is a peace and a contentment and just a willingness to leave the body when that time comes. It's not, people may struggle or don't want to leave for many different reasons in the days or weeks leading up to it, but in the final moments, and the reports from doctors and hospice workers are, the majority of people are just in a beautiful, peaceful space when they transition and when they leave the body. So
it's the big one.
Yeah. Well, yes, if you believe it is.
Yeah.
But
No,
and you, but you see, I've switched from seeing, things as endings to seeing things as beginnings.
yes. Well, it's both of those things, but it's
Yeah,
as my
yeah.
friend says, death lasts a long time.
Maybe, maybe.
Maybe. Well, we'll
Yeah,
see. We'll see.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I've always felt that I've been here before in some,
Mhm.
and so it's not in how I know that. I just know it. I don't really have any. I can't.
Yeah,
I can't give you a printout of how I know it. I just know it.
yeah, yeah.
So we'll see what the next round brings. But I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not ready yet.
And you see, nobody goes before their time anyway. So that's my knowing or my understanding. And I have a bit like yourself. I know things, and if you ask me how exactly I know them, I can't give you a written documentary evidence of or proof of how I know things. But it's like I believe we're carrying lifetimes of wisdom that we can access at different times. And part of it we have that just easy knowing access to it, and other times we might have to meditate, or people go into past life regression sometimes to either heal something in this life, or 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 to bring in more information. Actually, I had a story, if I have time to tell it, of where I had, when I was a younger man, I had problems with my stomach, but the muscles in my stomach, and if I was at a football game if I was standing for any length of time, I'd have to go and sit down and take the pressure off the stomach, and it was quite painful. I was not able to keep standing. And I went to France to learn. There's a famous labyrinth in the cathedral in Chartres there, and I was doing a kind of a retreat there. And one night I couldn't sleep. 3 o'clock in the morning, I decided, I'll just go for a walk. I might as well get a bit of exercise rather than be lying in the bed. And I walked out into the countryside, but the cathedral was at the top of a hill and it was floodlit. So I could always see how to get back or where I was going back to. And a few hours later, I was coming back, and I just dawned, people starting to walk their dogs in the morning. And I sat down by this big war memorial, and there was hundreds, maybe even thousands of names on it from different World War I, II, Franco-Prussian War. And whatever way I turned around to look at the names, one of the names almost rose up out of this war memorial. And we were asking about dousing. I had a pendulum with me at the time. I was only kind of beginner using it, but I started asking yes, no questions. And the first question I asked was this me in a past life? And I got a very strong yes. And obviously I had died in the war, so I started asking, how did I die? And was I shot in the head? I got a no. Was I shot in the chest? Now, and I asked, was I shot in the stomach? And at that moment, I bent over double with the cramps in my stomach.
Ooh, yeah. Wow.
And I said, it was one of the weirdest situations I've had, but I knew there was some connection between me and this name and the issue with my stomach. I then started asking, where did I die? Did I die in the battlefield, which might have been an obvious one? No. Did I die in a hospital? No. And I was trying to rack my brains, and I asked all kinds of strange places in a shop. But I asked, did I die in a farm building? And I got a very strong yes. And I was talking and this was maybe about 20 years ago. I was talking to my partner at the time, who's now my wife, and I was telling her the story. And her children said, "Did you tell Tony about your dreams?" She had a very vivid dream on a number of occasions, where she was a teenage girl, maybe about 16, living on a farm during the time of war, and this soldier crawled into the barn. He'd been shot in the stomach, and she tried to do some healing on him, but he died. And it was like, whoa. It's like one of those moments where you go, there's a lot more happening in this world or in this reality than I can make sense to. But it almost felt like, okay, either we were meant to be together in that life and something happened, or that we were just she was supposed to hold my head or whatever it was as I died, which may have been a possibility as well. But since then, I never had the problem with my stomach. That for me, reliving or remembering that past life experience cleared something physical for me in this life.
That's a great story.
Not
wow.
only an interesting story, but it was proof for me, that okay, there's a lot more to the world and to our existence than sometimes we give credit for, or the scientific community sort of alludes to or agrees to, or has evidence for. Many, many stories of, when you go researching past people who have had past lives, or children who have had them, or remember, some vivid details about their previous life. Very common in India, where reincarnation would be, what would I say, would be widely accepted, rather than in the West, maybe, where there'd be a lot of skepticism. But there were some cases in India where a young girl, Shanta Devi, was remembered her life as a woman in an adjoining village, and she was able to say her name and who her husband was, and he was a merchant, and was a school teacher in the school, went and found this merchant, and came, and they brought her back to, and she was able to tell things about her life there. She recognized the adults who were children in the previous life. And it became so well known that Gandhi set up a commission to investigate it. And the conclusion of the committee was, without a doubt, that this young girl had lived previously a life as this woman who died, I think maybe in childbirth. So, I mean, I have many other examples like that in the book, That You Gotta Love It, where it's the purpose of, what I go through in the book is to give knowledge and understanding of the different aspects and approaches to death, or the different, to life, even the continuation of life, so that when you work through the book, or when you read through it, the intention is you'll come to the conclusion, okay, life doesn't end at death. And I no longer call the afterlife, I just call it the hereafter. Because for me, there's a here before, a here now, and a hereafter.
Yeah.
And even calling it the afterlife almost implies that life ends. But for me, life is always, it continues, it always exists, and always will exist. And so will I, so will you, so will everybody. That our consciousness that you are, and that I am, will continue to exist. I may no longer have a physical body, but I will, the awareness that I am will exist and will continue to go on, either to have another life or to go off somewhere else and have other experiences and the infinite realms that are out there to be explored.
When you encounter a block in somebody, whether you call it a fear or just something that's stopping them from, how do you work with that person to open that up? It's probably not just one way, but can you give me an example of maybe somebody that you worked with, and what you discovered and how that got changed?
I generally will get, because I'm somebody, a spiritual teacher or spiritual healer, I spend time, but eventually said, you're clear, that there's nothing in you. So whatever you're picking up when you're working with somebody is directly related to some issue that they are having. So, for example, I was working with someone recently who was finding it difficult to walk, and that their legs had locked. And as soon as they mentioned that, I realized that this person had been tightly bound in a past life, the legs tied together with ropes. I could feel it almost, and that they'd been thrown into with weights into water and drowned. So as soon as and when I get this information, and again, it's a knowing, I don't see or I don't hear this information. It's just saying, it feels like this is what's happening. Almost like I can feel it myself. I could feel the restriction and the constriction myself. And so I ask them, how does that feel? And generally they'll have they'll be able to relate to that feeling themselves. And identifying, I said earlier, and I'd say it again, once knowing what the issue might be is half the battle.
When I think about how kids come into the world a certain way, I have 3 kids. They're all different, of course. They're just and I ask myself, how much of this is parenting, how much of it is genetics, how much of it is environment. I'm not judging the behavior. I'm just saying this is, they come in a certain way. But I never really ask myself, it's from a past life. I've never thought about that with my kids, even though I've read quite a bit about it, and I find it really fascinating. I read that there was a great book called Many Lives, Many Masters, which I read, years ago, and I had done some hypnotherapy, and I did a past life regression, and I did another one many years later just to see what it would be like. I mean, it seems like the possibilities are fairly infinite with what you can experience, but they were very, kind of profound experiences. And I can't prove anything, of course, but, I had these experiences, but I've never actually thought about it until this moment that maybe some of these things that were actually from a previous existence, which is, a lot of people would go, I'm shutting off this podcast right now. This is too out there, which is fine if you want to do that. But this is something that, because it's so not really provable in the concrete sense, but when you think about that, it's like the strings on the puppet are being pulled from the past, it's pretty fascinating. And I don't think it takes away, the idea of personal responsibility for yourself. I think it just sort of informs something. Mm-hmm. And it's not an excuse, but it may be, if that is the case, it may be a reason. It may be part of that. And I wonder, only because I've done these things myself. And one of them was, I have a particularly, aversion and terror of violence. And I did this past life regression, and there was this, it was long, I don't want to go into the details, but I was around this sort of mad violence. It was going on around me, and I was trying to stop it with words, and it wasn't working, and I just remember thinking, there was a certain hopelessness to the human condition, and people were going to do these kinds of things, no matter what I said or did. And it was terror. It was terror to me at the time in this experience. And I still kind of have that where I see, when I see it or experience it around me, even if it's just in the media, it really is disturbing, at the core of who I am. I'm like, it's just, so, I don't know where I'm going with this, other than just being informative.
Well, I can relate to that. I don't like violence either and tend to avoid it. I generally don't watch movies, or if we're halfway through a movie and there's violence, a lot of unnecessary violence comes on, I just switch or turn it off or turn the sound down until all that gore and is finished, even in movies. But I think most parents, or many parents will certainly admit that their children seem to come in with their personalities sort of fairly well formed. That children in the one family who are more or less rare the same. That they're completely, if there's only nurture, well then, surely they would all have the same personalities, but that's so distinct, and so distinct personalities from very young, the very quiet child, or the wild one, or the one who's always up to mischief, or the one who just will do what they're told no matter what, that there's such a wide range of children and personalities that it's almost like, okay, where did the personality come from? Yeah. And so,
you hear that from parents. They go, we don't know where this one came from.
Yes. Yeah. Or there's an expression in Ireland, they're an old soul, child who is wise beyond their years, even when they're very young and that, But there's stories, I have one or two examples in Debt You Got to Love It, the book, where there's accounts of children telling their parents that they chose their parents before they were born. That the child is more or less saying, there's one girl whose mother was a single parent, and the mother was sad one day, and she said, "It's okay, Mom. I knew you were going to be sad. I knew when I was in heaven with God, and I chose you to be my mother. That we'd be living alone, But I choose you because I knew you were going to be kind." And it's like. Okay, so I don't remember choosing my parents.
No, I don't
But
either.
there are other accounts in Death You Got to Love It of children who actually choose their parents and gave information, specifically told the parents what hotel they were in when they were conceived.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
and it's okay, as you say, some people may or may not believe this, but so please be skeptical of anything that I'm saying, but go and explore and investigate it yourself, because it's a bit like, psychic mediums, and I won't dwell too long on them, but almost anybody who has explored them or trying to debunk them, if they're genuine, that they come to be convinced that they're accessing information from somewhere else, because some of the information they're coming through, that they've tried to verify and have very, strict controls on how the medium was working, that there's just no way, they say, that they could have access to this information. So there's a whole world out there that is beyond our capacity, or our brain capacity, to understand that. And that the more we see ourselves as the energy that animates the body, and that we're a consciousness that extends beyond the physical body, that we can, that there's an energy system at play that we're a part of, well, then it opens up a whole world of, okay, there's a lot of what is happening, or what people are writing about, may have some truth in it. And it's really the switch between, do you believe that consciousness is a function of the brain or a function of physical matter? Or do you believe that consciousness is fundamental and physical matter is a function of consciousness? And that's really, whatever you believe, I would say question your beliefs, because because be a skeptic, and I encourage healthy skepticism. Or what's that quote, for those who believe, no evidence is necessary, and for those who don't believe, no evidence is sufficient. But so we can get tied into our beliefs, and I need to be careful myself that I don't get so tied to whatever belief I have that I don't go and explore beyond that or question that. So question everything.
Well, what a pleasure to talk to you today, Tony. Let's plug your book, and if there's a website, let's get that information out there to the folks listening.
Yes, this book is called Death, You've Got to Love It. And it is a thought-provoking title, certainly, and one that took me a while to get comfortable with, because I had to get comfortable with the shifting to loving death myself. But it is available now to order on all the major booksellers, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, even your local bookshop can order it for you. And it really took me on the journey, and the intention is it'll take you on a journey. Whatever your fears of death are, to be, if you're willing to explore them, you'll find evidence in this book that will broaden your horizons on death and broaden your understanding of death, and to bring, as I said earlier, we're either in a space of fear or love, so it bring you into a way of loving not only death, but it's really about loving life. It's about living life more in a more fulfilled and more enjoyable way, but through the lens of death, so that it has something for everybody, and certainly a book that's worth having on your shelf, and it will take you on a journey, and it'll allow you to open new doorways that you maybe were not aware of. And so for myself, I have a website. It's tonymchristie.com, and you can find me there. If you want to get in touch with me, drop me an email. Please go out and buy the book and let me know what you think. If you think it's, whether you like it or don't like it, or whether you agree with everything I'm saying or not, or whether you have some story you'd like to share, I'd love to hear what you have to share about this book. And you can follow me on my website, on social media, Instagram, Facebook. I share words of wisdom through my wisdom cards almost every day. And I just love to hear from people, and tell me how you're doing and what's happening with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Bob. I was delighted to be here, and thanks again.
Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. You can also listen on YouTube. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Tony Christie for being on the show. If you want to find out more, go to tonymchristie.com. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.